Hi, welcome to XRT Party. My guest today is one of the editors of WebXR APIs and a staff research engineer at Mozilla, Manish Goregaokar. Hi Manish, welcome to XRT Party and thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. I'm Manish. I work on the Servo browser engine at Mozilla, and I'm also on the Rust core team, and I edit the core WebXR specification in the Immersive Web Working Group at W3C.
My very first question is related to that. So this morning I was at a meeting with you at the same meeting, and I was just snooping around and looked and saw you had 16 commits to both Firefox Reality Servo and also the Immersive Web. How do you do that? What is your secret to being so productive?
Wait, what? 16 commits to where?
Both
today?
Servo and yeah.
Wow. Okay, that doesn't sound right. But I probably have a lot of commits to that's in this month.
Oh no! Oh really?
Yeah.
No, I did click on your specific the specific day. Let me try it again. It's right here. The thing is that
I mean, you
could
could.
be.
Oh, you are right. No, you are totally right. Wow. Okay.
You see,
The reason behind that. How did that happen?
probably some stuff got merged today.
Yes. Okay. So the reason that happened is, well, today I did a whole bunch of pull requests at once in the morning after the triage call, and one of them included a bunch of tiny cleanups. But yeah. Um, but yes, in general, I do tend to be like all over the place, and I think the reason for me is that I prefer to have many different things to work on. So like, let's say if today I don't want to write code, it's fine. I can write some spec text instead. I don't want to write spec text. It's fine. I can respond to some community emails or whatever. Like, there are many different things that I always try to keep on my plate so that if I feel like doing a kind of thing, I have that kind of thing on my plate to do.
Are you aware this is a superpower? Because I have the hardest time switching context, and so I divide my days. Like one day is WebXR, the other day is like I'm working on a curriculum or a project. So it's really hard. Does that come naturally to you?
I think context switching is hard for me as well, but it's more that if like today morning I sat down and was like, okay, I'm going to work on spec stuff in the morning at least, and now in the afternoon I'm almost done with the spec stuff, and I'm going to write code after this. So it's like it's not as much context switching that I do as it is that okay, now I have these 10 different things I can work on. Today I'm going to pick this one.
Yeah, it is really hard. I don't know if you ever saw, but there's tons of like sticky notes in my room. Those are all my to-dos.
Oh yeah, I used to do that. I used to do that a lot, but the problem was I would put up sticky notes and then forget to take them down and forget to put like I would do it for a week and then the next 2 weeks I'd not. So then I just have like ancient sticky notes, and I'd keep trying this, and ultimately I was like, forget it. I'm not gonna try. I'm just gonna try to remember, and it does mean that I forget things, but yeah, now I use like GitHub notifications and things like that to manage, and it's fine.
That is true. I lose some of them because, sticky notes get old and then they dry up and fall. And I call them unlucky to-dos. They're never going to get done.
Yeah.
The reason it's good for me is it just shows me, like, most of the stuff is things that I want to do but not important or urgent for me to do. So it reminds me I can't do everything I want to. I will never get to some of these projects. But it's okay.
That's really nice.
Yeah. So can you tell us how did you get involved with W3C and what does it mean to be an editor to start with?
So I got involved a year ago, a year ago. Like a year ago, I started implementing WebXR in Servo, and I started coming across like various small spec issues, and also just, and as time progressed, I was finding more spec issues and kind of like making pull requests to fix them. And I realized that there was a working group meeting happening in the Bay Area. So I decided to head down there for the day and join. And it was really fun, and I enjoyed sort of being a part of that. And my status was that like I've been implementing this, and there are many places where I see that the specification needs work, so I wanted to do work on that. So I just ended up doing a lot of that until Brandon and Nell were like, okay, you should be an editor now. So yeah, being an editor mostly means, I think, mostly it's a bunch of different things. It's, I think, driving discussions on various issues that need to get resolved and kind of just keeping an eye on the state of things. I think every day I'm opening up a couple of our tabs of like pre-CR issues and other issues, and like, is there anything I can do to make this list smaller? So a lot of work like that, a lot of just driving discussions during spec meetings, trying to get people to come to some kind of consensus on something so that we can close out whatever issues and bring ourselves closer to completion. And also in general, like having an understanding of specs in general, which I had this thing I had before coming to this working group, because I have implemented specs from like all over the place. Servo is a small team, so you end up like touching all kinds of things, and you get a general idea of like how specs in general are written. So it's a lot of that work as well, of just like this language needs to be massaged to be better spec-like-ish.
How are specs generally written?
Badly, but no, specs are more, they're like this halfway between code and prose, where it's not code, but it's not just like a book. It's not like an essay. There's plenty of stuff that's very technical, and there are a lot of like pedantic differences between saying one thing or saying the other thing that like almost sound identical. And you have to be very careful with that. You have to be careful where you link. But at the same time, there is also actual English text that needs to be readable and not just clunky technical language. And it's like balancing both, and getting this right is tricky. It's a very interesting space, because I mean, this is more W3C specs, but like any official spec really, because if you're writing technical specification for like a bunch of other people who you are going to work with on a project you're starting, that's one thing. You just write, like, you can write down what your plan is, and there aren't that many restrictions. Whereas if it's a specification that's going to be out there that many different browsers are going to implement, people are going to use to write the documentation, you need to cater to a lot of groups at once. You need to cater to the people who are going to be using that API, the people who are going to be writing documentation, and of course the browsers. And it needs to be in a certain way that prevents browsers from implementing things differently, prevents users from getting confused. There are just so many things you have to juggle, so it can get tricky.
Yes. And we are working at WebXR Immersive App with people who has tons of experience. And, as a new person on this, newish, of course, new is a relative term. I appreciate, your experience and getting to know all of the specs and getting involved really fast. To ask a question related to that, how did you get into web in the first place? Because I know that you studied physics.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think like basically ages ago when I was a student, so I've always been into programming. Like while I was studying physics, I was also teaching myself programming. I studied physics because I realized that I was terrible at teaching myself physics, but I had had success in teaching myself programming. So it's like, I'll get someone else to teach me the one that I can't do. And so I was basically playing, someone introduced me to Firefox ages ago as a code base to program on, and the way my programming, like I said, is mostly self-taught. So and I mostly learn things through open source. Like I'd find an open source project and start fixing things and learn things by like looking at the code base, trying to figure out how to fix a bug. I really like learning by doing. So I did a lot of that, and someone introduced me to Firefox, and I did a bunch of stuff for Firefox back then, and that was really fun. I learned a lot, and then but it was also hard to find like bigger projects to work on. So someone told me about Servo, and I started contributing to Servo. Again, starting with small stuff, but scaling onto bigger stuff. I did a Google Summer of Code project, and then kept doing stuff, and it was just really fun, and I enjoyed it. And that's kind of what got me into web, and it's also got me this job. So yeah, it was basically Servo is what got me into the web, and I really enjoyed that space. Yeah.
Not many people get to work on their passion project. It must be nice to do this full time, work on Servo.
Yeah. It is nice, yeah.
I am a huge fan of Servo, as you can imagine. It is fascinating. Was fascinating to see my hands for the first time on a web browser.
Yeah.
We were just talking about it with Ada. She said hi to you.
Oh, yeah.
On another program. So tell us about Servo. How many people are working on it, and what are the things that you are implementing and planning to implement in the future?
So Servo is an experimental browser engine by Mozilla Research. It started out as a way to test out Rust. So Rust is a programming language that's memory safe, thread safe, and overall enables writing code in a way that is really hard to write in other languages, but is still fast. And the idea was memory safety issues are a big problem for browsers. Thread safety issues make it really hard to write a parallel browser. So all browsers, like most browsers these days, for a given page, almost everything that the page does runs on like one main thread and then a couple other helper threads. It's not using the full power of our computers, which usually have 4, 8, 16, large numbers of cores at this point. So the idea was to experiment with how can a parallel browser work? Can it work? And so that's what the project was. We kind of proved that yes, a parallel browser can work. It can be faster. Some of the code that we wrote, for example, for all the CSS, the way CSS is handled, like styling and parsing, that is all now, all of our code for that is now part of Firefox. But in general, it's been like a test bed, and it's basically a from scratch browser browser engine that is parallel and memory safe.
And how do you do that two things together? Like parallel and memory safe?
Rust gets us that for free.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. So yeah, and now like for a while it was more that, hey, this is a place, because it's a separate code base and it's smaller and it's been built much more modularly, we can experiment with this and look at ideas that Firefox can eventually pick up. Now we're also trying our own stuff. Like, for example, because it's modular and easy to experiment with, we're using this as an experimental ground for WebXR as well, as you've seen. And specifically, we're hoping to get it used on AR devices. That's one of the main things I'm working on these days, is just getting our WebXR implementation to be as good as possible. And related things, like, for example, for the last week I've been looking at audio, like web audio related things for XR applications like hubs, where you want to stream audio over WebRTC and do stuff with it. Another thing that we're doing these days, I'm not as directly involved in this, but I hope to be soon once this project reaches a certain point, it is doing our layout. So a big complicated part of browsers is layout, where once you know what style each element has, you need to know where on the page it goes. And Servo does this in parallel, but this was written ages ago. Like most of the code for this was written ages ago, back when we weren't sure how to do parallel layout. Rust was new, Servo was new. So the code works, but it's not that maintainable. So adding features like Flexbox and Grid and all of that is actually really hard. But now we know how parallel layout works. So the idea is to redo it from scratch using all that we've learned in a modular way so that if we want to add flexbox or grid or table layout, it's an easy modular feature to add as opposed to the huge amount of work it is right now. So yeah, that's currently what's going on in Servo mostly.
For a developer team, it's really hard to invest in a very new technology, especially when there's lots of unknowns. You mentioned Servo started with the Rust. Do you know how that happened? Because it's a huge risk. Like you can't build for so long.
It's actually, I guess in a sense, it's worse than that. It's not that Servo started with Rust. It's that Rust and Servo started together. Rust was. So Graydon Hoare was a research engineer at Mozilla. I think he was a research engineer, but Graydon Hoare was at Mozilla and he was working on basically he had an idea for such a programming language and basically started writing it and at some point got buy-in from other people that this could be used for a better browser. And so the Rust and Servo projects kind of evolved together initially. In fact, I think the whole thing was just called the Servo project back then. I don't remember this history as well, so I could be wrong. I wasn't around back then. So this was like a big experiment, and as the experiment started proving started winning, as the experiment started proving more and more viable, then more people started working on it. So it's kind of like a gradual scale up, but also the Rust at the time when Servo started being written was very different than today. It was more like OCaml than now, where it's very different, much faster than it used to be, etc.
I have one coworker who everybody was making fun of for constantly talking about Rust, and then the next year everybody wanted to take a class from him. His class was full.
Yeah, I'm quite active. I'm actually on the Rust core team, so I'm part of the leadership of the community of the actual governance. But the community is quite big at this point. I don't really know how to quantify big, but there were some pretty big numbers on like how many Rust programmers are out there, which I've now completely forgotten. But it's like it's not a tiny number. It's gaining traction a lot and really quickly. I know that Microsoft has been ramping up very heavily on Rust because of the research last year that they posted that I think 70% of security vulnerabilities are memory safety bugs. And recently Google published a similar thing, and they're also talking about Rust. They're also talking about making their own language like Rust, I think. So everyone is kind of jumping on the Rust train, and it's kind of nice. So it's growing. It's pretty big. I've been involved for a while now. I have this tendency to go meta, which is that like if I'm working on a thing and there's a thing underneath it, I kind of want to go touch the thing that's underneath it and then find the thing underneath it and just keep doing that. So like I was working on Servo, and this was back in the days when Rust was not stable yet. So there were lots of rough edges. So I'd find a rough edge and be like, oh, okay, I want to fix this now, and I'd go to Rust and fix it. So this kind of got me into it, and I eventually wrote a linter for Rust called Clippy, and this kind of got me interested in writing, like bettering the tooling ecosystem, and now I basically eventually ended up heading the DevTools team, and that's how I got on the core team.
Was it by any chance inspired by the Microsoft Clippy?
Yes, it was named as a joke. It started off as very much, I like writing static analyses, but also this is a very cool name and I want to name a project something like that. So it was a joke, and it was mostly a thing that I was writing for myself, but kind of people really, really liked it. It is the Rust community, and Rust is all about the compiler yells at you to stop you from making mistakes. So people in Rust tend to like it when the compiler yells at them, so they're more than happy to turn on other things that yell at them even more. So people are really fond of that. Yeah.
Perfect naming.
Yeah.
Oh, that is amazing. Really cool. I feel like writing the spec, implementing a browser and working in a new language, they are similar. I'm sure they're complementing in each other, but they must be different from each other too. What do you think are the differences?
I mean, working on a browser is more writing code and designing things, whereas writing a spec is you're writing that like weird non-code text, non-prose, weird middle ground language, and you're trying to write something so that other people writing code understand and implement it right. And of course, there's a lot more consensus involved. In Servo, if I want to make a change to Servo, I make a pull request and someone else on my team looks at it and is like, that looks good, and then that's it. Whereas on the immersive web thing, if I want to suddenly add a new feature, there needs to be a lot of discussion. You need to push that discussion and all that. So a lot more talking to people, consensus building, which is also fun, but like it's different. It's a
It
lot
is.
more work of talking to people and working with people. And in the Rust community, I think I do a lot of different things in the community. I used to write more code. I used to do a lot of diagnostics work. I don't do it that much these days. I just don't have time. But I a lot of my work is coordinating with other people, and the core team's work ends up having to do a lot with like communications and broader decisions. So just taking part in those decisions. But a nice thing has been that like my experience in the Rust community has helped me better understand how to do consensus building elsewhere. So that has been useful in the immersive web group. And I'm sure that like stuff I've learned in the immersive web group has helped me back in Rust. So it's like they complement each other in a way.
It is really good that you're in touch with developers who are trying to figure out things in another language too, which helps seeing the developer's point of view. Because sometimes I feel like every company, every city, every country is kind of a bubble, and it's hard to see other people's perspective on it.
Yeah.
And so, as an editor, I'm sure you love all of the children equally. But what is the spec that you're most excited about?
I mean, given that the core spec is the one it's very close to actually becoming CR and stable and, happy fun times, I'm kind of excited about that happening, but
Can
I'm
you explain
definitely,
CR? Sorry.
um, so the W3C has like a spec process where things go from, you have the editor's draft, which is basically the live draft that we are actually editing, which is on GitHub. And then there's this working draft concept, which is every now and then we cut a working draft, which is more of like, here's just the next step. Here's the next step. And things are still going to change, but if different people want to agree on implementing something, then you should agree on implementing this working draft instead of everyone implementing different levels of different levels of this editor's draft, which is what happens anyway, but like at least the working draft gives people a sort of, stopping point. And then there's this candidate recommendation, which is like, as far as functionality is concerned, the editors think this is ready, and we can make future changes that like create what's called another level of this, whatever. But this is like, we now want to say that we're almost ready to final stamp this. And then there's this last step called recommendation, which means that it's no longer a candidate. This is final. This is it. And usually in between that, mostly all you make is editorial changes of like, let's make this language a little bit nicer. Let's add some examples and just make the spec better. So CR that's the next step, and once that happens, it kind of means that it's stable. Of course, WebXR is already implemented in many browsers, so it is in some sense stable, but there's still some like smaller things that are in flux. Yeah. But the spec I'm actually excited about is the hand input one, which I'm working on, because I just really like the idea of like being able to just getting access to hands and all the things you can do. Like you can build a piano app, or you can folks are talking about hands and hubs. Like right now, if you've ever used hubs, it does know a bit about where your fingers are because your fingers can rest on buttons and press buttons. So it shows these like little hand models, and like they can be like this or like this or like this, but it doesn't have full articulation. And full articulation means you can do all kinds of hand expressions and stuff like that. So that's kind of exciting. Yeah.
Did you join to Mixed Reality Dev Days?
A little bit.
Did you see Alex?
I had some other stuff.
Yeah. Did you see Alex's talk? Alex Turner about OpenXR?
Yeah, I think so.
I think, he did a great job just, by using his hand a little bit more, making it as if he's really there and doing the talk, and interaction was different. And those tiny little things affect your perception so much. You really make a difference. And I can imagine the hands having more emotion. And even the blinking is very interesting. And the interaction will be very different if we have the actual eye movements, like when we are looking at somewhere, that if we see it, it will be more like our normal interaction. But the part I was having so much fun with was when people just left their controllers on the table and their hands were just like hanging in there.
Yeah. My team does these like weekly hubs hangouts where we sometimes do demos and things like that. And one of my team members often will put his headset down on like a table, or like, I don't know what he puts it on, but it's, I think, low. And what happens is sometimes the entire hubs model, if he does it a certain way, it kind of just collapses on itself, and it looks like it just crumpled. It looks very creepy when it happens, because it's like his hands will float up and then the head will kind of go like this. Yeah.
It's very dramatic.
Very dramatic, yes.
On Altspace, I noticed it just goes slowly. Your head, you look like you were listening, and then suddenly you're like dead.
Yeah. I think VR does have some interesting, funny situations that crop up.
What do you think about having your meetings on Hub?
I kind of like it. The nature of like the spatial audio, based on where you are, like the way you hear stuff, it enhances the experience. But for a meeting, also, it's to some extent like for a meeting you want to be able to hear everyone. So I sometimes find myself raising the volume of people who are a bit further away, but this is often just the case of some people have like quieter microphones, and it's less of a problem when you're on a computer. But this sounds like something that we will slowly have to learn to deal with. But it's really fun otherwise, just because you get an idea of like where everyone's attention is, which is you never have the problem of people talking over each other as much because you see where everyone's looking. Like, I have that problem in meetings all the time, that like someone will start to say something and I'll start to say something at the same time, and then we'll kind of like do that for a while. Whereas I haven't seen that happen as much in hubs, even while we've had some discussions. And sometimes there have been like cases where someone will show a demo and then like there'll be a discussion, and then I and one of my coworkers will kind of go to the side and have a different discussion. I think that's only happened once, where we had an idea and then we started to discuss it right there, and we kind of shifted aside. But it's still interesting that like how easy it is to do that. So I read the model, and my entire background in programming is mostly through the internet. I'm not someone who has spent, until I got a job, and even after I got a job, I haven't spent that much time in person in programming meetings. They've either been online, or more often, like not even meetings. It's you send people messages on IRC or Slack, and they respond when they have time. And it's like right now at Mozilla, my team is all over the place. So there aren't that many opportunities for in-person meeting, except for when we do it a couple times a year. So I'm totally used to doing it online, asynchronously or over video chat, and even then, I find it to be very valuable to have that sort of thing.
Yes. It makes the side conversation a little bit more normal as well. You can just walk up to a group and then have a circle there and then move on. I really like that, especially in conference environments, which we are not going to have anytime soon, I guess.
Yeah.
It's been great. Is there any other XR related applications that you like to use?
I've been using Supernatural a lot.
What is that?
So Supernatural is this VR workout thing. It's like Beat Saber, but it's more explicitly geared towards being a workout. And it's really fun. And Beat Saber, I like Beat Saber a lot, but also with Supernatural, firstly, they kind of have like these curated playlists that are both a curated workout and a curated playlist, which makes it there's less of a whole I need to find new music thing, and it's definitely more focused on. It's less focused on get the perfect skill and more focused on like strength and other things. Which I kind of like that shift. In Beat Saber, I mostly I'll find a track and I'm gonna spend like an hour trying to get it perfect. Whereas in Supernatural, and that's fun, but at the same time in Supernatural, it's more I'll do 10 different tracks today, and it's going to be all interesting and fun. And I won't like all of them, but I like most of them, and I'll have fun. And that's been, especially now that I'm stuck inside, that's been really nice. I do, most of my working out is I can still do that because it's like biking and hiking and stuff, but it's valuable to be able to sit at home and do this stuff, and it's really fun.
Yes.
I've been enjoying that.